Hello, everybody. This is lecture number 2. We will be going over the um, 4 fields, introducing the 4 fields so that you are a little bit familiar before we go deep into everything. Now, let me. All right. Okay, good. So, real quickly, announcements. The reflection is due soon. Generally speaking, for what's due, just check the announcements and check the weekly modules, and you'll be good to go. Yeah, make sure to read the reflection or the homework assignment thoroughly. Make sure to follow all the directions. You'll be good to go. All right. So, one thing what we do in this class, we have like what I call think about questions. It's kind of like something to I don't know, to frame what we're about to talk about, right? And I want you to think about what are some fields of study or some academic fields that are similar to anthropology. Okay. Now, anthropology is very interesting. Anthropology offers a broader view, a distinctive comparative cross-cultural perspective. However, anthropology is much more the study of non-industrial peoples. It's comparative science that examines all societies, ancient and modern, and simple complex. The study of human societies and cultures and their development, as well as, same thing, the study of human society and culture and their development by Webster. Sorry. Wait 1 second. Yeah, so the real thing here, right, is this is a very vague understanding. So what I want to kind of show you or kind of give you is a very clean definition of what. Oh wait, shoot, is it even recording? Is it recording? Hold on, sorry, give me one. Yes, it's recording. Okay. Yeah, so what I want to give you is a much more understandable definition of anthropology. Once you understand what it is and we come back, you'll see why everyone is kind of vague about what it is. But yeah, anthropology is the study of humanity, the study of humans overall. And that's why within anthropology, there are 4 separate fields. Okay, and we're going to go over that today. But these things still remain true, right? The study of human society and the cultures and development, yeah, that's part of it, but it's also the study of human biology as well. So just keep that in mind. Anything that's human related is probably going to be under anthropology. Okay. Some important points here, though, are anthropology is a holistic, biocultural, and comparative study of humanity. It is the systemic exploration of human biological and cultural diversity across time and space, examining the origins of and changes in human biology and culture. Anthropology provides explanations for similar differences among humans and their societies. So let me break this down into a couple of things. The first thing, anthropology is holistic, biocultural, comparative study of humanity. You know, all that's trying to say is that anthropology has a lot of different. Um, it's very comprehensive. That's what it's trying to say. It does not just focus on science. It does not just focus on culture. It does not just focus on history or all these other things. It focuses on kind of everything together. It tries its best to encaps or and try to understand the human experience as a whole, not just by itself, right? And we'll talk about why that's important later. Now, this part is, even though it's kind of boring, is very important. Systemic exploration of human, biological, and cultural diversity across time and space. Now, across time and space, we'll go over in the next slide, but systemic exploration, that is actually what separates anthropology from other fields of study. If you really ask yourself, like, what is the difference between cultural anthropology and sociology? What is in between biological anthropology and biology? The real difference there is not necessarily the topic, but the way they go about researching it. Okay. Then finally, the next thing, this one I don't love so much, examining the origins of and changes in human biology and culture, and the Bible provides explanations for similarities and differences among humans and their society. So while that is true, I feel that's a little bit too introductory. Now, what I think is much more important is that anthropology provides a better provides a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, right? Both philosophically, metaphorically, but also literally. Like literally what separates humans from other types of animals. This is more of a question that is explained or that is explored by anthropology, right? For example, this is an easy question. What is language? Right. I mean, we're going to talk about it later, but what is language? Is it a noise that has a meaning? Maybe. Does that mean that every time a dog barks, are they using language? And if so, it's obviously different from what we're speaking. So why is it different? Right. These are the kind of questions that kind of go into, like, again, what is it to be human? Okay. So all fields of anthropology consider variation in time and space. Each also examines adaptation, the process by which organisms cope with environmental stresses. Anthropology's biocultural perspective is a particularly effective way of approaching interrelations between biology and culture. Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images. So let's go with the first one, time and space. Very important. Okay. And you might think this is like some super deep thing. It's not. If I were to open a pizza shop today versus a pizza shop in 2020, would it be the same thing? Absolutely not. If I were to open a pizza shop today versus a pizza shop in the 1980s, would it be the same? Absolutely not. That is the importance of time, because when time changes, your whole surroundings change, your context changes, right? Second thing, space. Another easy thing that sounds very deep. Um, would it be the same if I open a pizza shop in Brooklyn versus I open a pizza shop in Wisconsin? Absolutely not, right? Would it be the same if I opened a pizza shop in Brooklyn and I opened it even in Manhattan? No, right? So that's what is very important about all these things, right? Is a lot of times, especially if we're doing, let's say we're doing good anthropology, you're capturing something in a moment in time that is particular to that moment in time and to that place. And that's why time and space is so important, okay? Each field of anthropology also examines adaptation, the process by which organisms cope with environmental stresses, right? So there's some easy things here, right? So for example, people who live in very, very high elevations, like the Himalayas or whatever, they tend to have a bigger lung capacity. You know, surprise, surprise, right? That's a very clean-cut biological adaptation. But remember, each field talks about their adaptations. So let's talk about some cultural adaptations. How do you, especially as someone that lives in New York, deal with the stress of having to make money? Very simple. You get a bunch of jobs. You might force yourself to go to Kingsborough. You might try to move somewhere else so the pressure is not as strong. However we deal with that kind of stress is what anthropologists are into, right? And again, in this particular case, I hope I illustrated, it's not just biological, it's also cultural. Okay. So anthropology's biocultural perspective is a particularly effective way of approaching interrelation between biology and culture. Cultural forces mold human biology, including our body types and images. So if you look at this is a little far off, but remember how I said one of my goals is that you understand the impact of culture in daily life. People for some reason assume that biology and science is not influenced by culture. It very heavily is influenced by culture, and we're going to talk about that as we move on. Okay. Sorry. And also for this particular slide, it is important for you to understand that they don't exist without each other. They have to have each other in order to exist. It is part of the two parts of the same coin, if you will. Okay. So now, anthropology concerns with biology, society, culture, and language link anthropology to many other fields, sciences and humanities, right? And as you'll see when we go on, this is kind of why it's hard to define what anthropology actually is. So the four main fields of social culture of anthropology are social culture anthropology, biological physical anthropology, linguistic anthropology, and anthropological archaeology. Okay, those four are the main categories of anthropology. Now, you have to be careful though, right? Because you might be like, oh, Professor Falk, I've heard of medical anthropology. Why isn't that up there? That is because when you have anything outside of these four, they exist as a subcategory under them. So for example, you're doing medical anthropology, it's most likely going to be biological physical anthropology. But if you're doing medical anthropology and you're looking at some of the cultural factors, such as like how do people feel about COVID policies, that would be under social culture anthropology, even though it'd still be medical, right? So keep that in mind. When everything that you see falls under these four, right? These are the kind of like the if you will, the big four, if you will. So We'll talk about this later. It's fine. So the first one I want to talk about, which is my personal favorite, this is actually what I'm trained in. Culture anthropology explores the cultural diversity of the present and the recent past. Very straightforward. Ethnography is the most famous form of research, and there's also ethnology. Ethnography is field work to collect data from a specific group or community, and ethnology is when you are basically doing a glorified book report and you are comparing, contrasting, and generalizing based off of other people's work. It's not necessarily bad, but it's not what makes anthropology special. Okay. So ethnography is very special because ethnography is when you basically put yourself in a situation where you understand the people you're studying's lifestyle. Okay. And that's very, I mean, that basically means you have to live with them to a certain extent, right? So let me give you a classic example. Actually, we'll have one pretty soon. But one of the classic examples is, let's say there's a group of people that live in Thailand. They're called the Karen people. Actually, this is real. That and they're a minority group, right? Um, the researcher literally flew from Kyoto University to live with that group of people. And now, aside from observing what they do day to day, she also is fluent in the language they speak. She is she's very well versed in the cultural understandings of the things that happen around them, of how they might approach different things, whatever, right? That is a classic example of ethnography. You are studying a group of people and you are living with them, right? This might exist in smaller ways as well. For example, my master's thesis was an ethnography of recent immigrant Chinese families and how they arranged their lives around the SHSAT, which is the specialized high school exam. And like, you know, what they did after school, what they did before school. I would take their kids sometimes to go to tutoring. I would take the parents to go shopping and see like what they bought, what they thought about what they bought, how they look at education, so on and so forth, right? These are things that you can only do through ethnography. Okay. And you might ask yourself, like, why do you need to be so close to them? It seems kind of like a waste of whatever time and resources. It's not. If I were to ask you in high school or middle school, what did you have to do after school? And you told me I went home. And I asked someone from Nebraska, what did you after school? And they said, I went home. Someone that doesn't know the cultural differences of living in Nebraska and New York would be like, oh, that's what they did the same thing after school. But no, because in New York, I'm sure many of you have had classmates or friends that do this, or maybe you yourself, you know, I go to school in Brooklyn, but they live in the freaking Bronx, and that's like a 2 hour journey, right? And you know, the student in Nebraska, while their parents might pick them up, they might deal with snowstorms that are like, you know, way more intense than it is here in Brooklyn. We don't know. You would only know those things if you were researching them and very close to them day to day. Okay. Now, so when it comes down to this, what advantage would social culture anthropology have over other fields of researching groups of people? It's ethnography, right? It is that they are with the people and they try to gain as much insight through that method, as opposed to just reading about them or understanding generalized knowledge. Okay, very good. Next one, archaeology. Archaeology is probably the most famous of the anthropology groups. If you guys have ever heard of Indiana Jones, that might be a little old for you guys, or Tomb Raider. Those two characters are archaeologists, probably terrible ones, but it doesn't matter. Archaeologists, their goal is to reconstruct cultural patterns often of prehistoric populations, right? And that's very important, right? Because a lot of people think that their primary goal is to dig stuff up. That is their primary method. That's what they do. But their goal is to understand how our ancestors lived, right? Like you have to think about why are they digging that stuff up? And that's important because that's what separates archaeologists from, for example, zoologists. Zoologists and paleontologists and everyone, they all dig stuff up, but the purpose of digging stuff up is very different. For archaeology, the main purpose is to reconstruct the past and understand how our ancestors lived. Archaeology primarily focuses on the archaeological record. We'll talk about that during the thing. Material evidence of human modification of physical environment. This includes stone tools, pottery, metalwork, textile, and other technology, so on and so forth, right? So this type of anthropology is probably the one you've heard of. Oh, the mummy. The mummy, right? That's another one, right? They are archaeologists and they're trying to like, you know, investigate all this stuff. Now, unfortunately, archaeology is usually not that exciting, but it is very physically taxing. Now their goal though is it's very straightforward. In fact, I think it's to me, okay, I don't know if this will confuse you. I don't think it will. If you think about archaeology, archaeology is actually social cultural anthropology, but of the past, right? And so the separation between archaeology and social cultural anthropology, really the only thing the separation is time. Because obviously you don't have the people to live with or to follow around, you have to do it by digging stuff up and doing different kinds of analysis. So you can look at it that way. That being said, although archaeologists usually study the past, what are some ways people or cultures today can benefit from their research? That's a very, very general question, but one thing I'd like to emphasize about this particular point is that yes, there's part of it just like knowing where you come from, absolutely, but also too, as things get more when you are not in construction, let's say, if you're not an architect, maybe the development of how our houses became rectangular or square isn't that important to you. But if you are part of those fields, it is extremely important to you. And so when you understand how things became the way they were, it'll also guide the way that you move forward, right? Now that's a more kind of like philosophical answer. But let me ask you another question. Have you ever thought about specifically like how did things such as banking come about? How did it go from, hey, why don't you hold my, seashells for me to let me Venmo you $20 for dinner? Like, how did it go from that? How did it go from some dude keeping stuff safe behind a desk to now they use our funds to trade, they offer loans, they all do all kinds of stuff. Well, how do they get to that point? That is the stuff that archaeology can really shed some insight on. Additionally, this is one I like to bring up a lot, is the sewage system, right? Even our parents and our parents' parents and our parents' parents' parents have had have been around in a time where the sewage system has been very, very effective, right? Where you can flush a toilet and it goes somewhere else. Have you ever thought about how advanced that is? There's not a lot of electricity or anything going through that situation. I mean, the ancient Romans developed a sewage system, right? How did we go from, hey, we shouldn't poop where we eat, let's move the poop, to let's poop in this thing that'll take it so far away that it's safe for us to live in this 5 mile radius? Those types of questions are very important because it shows how we developed and how we might develop in the future. Okay. All right. Full disclosure, full transparency, biological physical anthropology is not my specialty. I try my best. But yeah, so biological anthropology is study of human biological diversity through time as it exists in the world today. You might ask yourself, what's the difference between biological anthropology and biology? The difference is just the focus. Biological anthropology just focuses on humans. Regular biology focuses on all kinds of biology. Okay, so some examples of what biological anthropology would study are things like human biological evolution, such as the changes in our anatomy, which is very straightforward, right? Like, how did we go from, I don't know, how do we go from short to tall or whatever? Okay. Human genetics, right? This includes how humans have migrated as well as how diseases have spread in our history. Human growth and development, such as lactose, the development of the enzyme lactose. So what's interesting about lactose is that if you drink milk when you're young, you develop the enzyme to digest it. What's interesting also is that when you're older and you haven't drank milk when you were young, you do not have the enzyme to digest it. Okay. Human biological plasticity, how our bodies react in the immediate situation, such as when it's hot, we sweat. When it's cold, we shiver. When we're in high altitude, our lungs, might get like hard to breathe or whatever, right? And finally, primatology, which is the study of non-human primates, such as analyzing chimpanzee DNA. So these are all examples that fall under biological anthropology. And again, the only difference is that biological anthropology focuses on humans. Okay. Now, although this is probably your first time formally interacting with anthropology, or could you previously have learned about anthropological research but didn't know? And that answer is quite easy. It's anytime you're learning about human anatomy, it's most likely from an anthropologist. anytime you've seen, I don't know if you know her, Jane Goodall, if they showed like a chimpanzee or a monkey documentary during during a substitute teacher day or whatever, that is biological anthropology. Okay. All right. Oh, sorry. Last one. Linguistic anthropology. Linguistic anthropology considers diversity among languages. It also studies how speech changes in social situations over time. Study language reveals the cultural factors that shape language use. So this is a very interesting field. I mean, kind of the more intense things is they study languages to revive them, right? So there's a lot of languages that aren't heavily used anymore. They will study language to revive them, and so they don't go extinct. And then they also look at you know how language changes over time, right? But this could also, the other more fun example is also studying how language is used in certain situations, right? So for example, I'm mad tight. Well, at least before TikTok, I'm mad tight. Like what does that actually mean? Does it mean the same thing as it means in like Wisconsin? Probably not. But you know, still the difference of when to use that language, when not to use that language, how you learn that language. These are all questions that linguistic anthropologists ask. Okay. Now, this little fun question at the bottom. In American English, let's say you don't have any understanding of America. In American English, what can you tell about American society and culture through the differences of Miss, Mrs., and Miss? Right? Even just by me knowing that there's three different names for women suggests to me that women and men are not equal in this society, right? Whether it's good or bad, who knows? But it is clear that it is very important for people to know whether someone is married or not married. And more important to know if a woman is married in particular. Okay. So those are the kind of things that linguistic anthropologists get into. Now, so those are the four main fields, okay? So I know it's a lot, but we're going to go through them one by one. Also, if you notice, one field, one reflection, one field, one reflection, it's like five. Anyways, or four, and then like five. The fifth one is the one that's due later on this week. Anyways, the next thing is academic versus applied. Academic anthropology has the goal of discovering more about humanity and adding to the pool of knowledge that exists in anthropology. Applied is using the tools provided by anthropology to solve contemporary social problems. So the real issue here, right, is not necessarily whether one's better or worse, right? It depends on what your goals are. Academic, the pro side of that is that you go into things like kind of with an open mind, right? But the downside of that is that sometimes it's pretty boring because you don't know what you're doing at first. Okay. Applied is the opposite. Applied is you're very focused on doing one thing or with the skills and you end up doing that thing. The downside of it is the pro side is that exciting. The downside is that it might not be as open as you would be with academic. Okay. So let's say let's say I'm a food researcher, or I really care about like how different societies use beef, right? In the applied situation, I might go somewhere and just be like, yo, how do these people make beef? I get there and I realize like, oh, they don't make beef. And I'm sad and I just go home. But in reality, they had a whole different cultural dynamic around skateboarding that I just didn't want to explore, right? And I didn't want to explore skateboarding because I'm already so dead set on the beef. So that's a great example of the downside of applied, right? And in the academic side of it, it'd be more like, oh, let's go to the society and see what happens. And it's like it would be interesting to know a little bit about beef, but oh wow, the skateboarding thing is open is there. Let me explore that, right? So there's advantages, disadvantages of both. But applied is much more interesting because like just as a professor maybe or as someone that's reading a newspaper article, imagine me saying I would like to go to this society and see what they do. That is such a boring thing. But if I'm like, yo, I have done this much research on people, with beef recipes, and I'm going to there to find out what the beef is. It influenced by Mexican culture? Is it influenced by American culture? Who knows? I want to figure this out. That's much more interesting, right? So Yeah, and also when you have that kind of interest, it kind of helps it go a little further sometimes. Like the research will go a little further, roll a little bit further. But you know, it's not better or worse, but there are two types of anthropology. Now, full circle, what are some other academic fields that are similar to anthropology? So there are quite a few, right? We talked about a few of them already. Biology is obviously very similar to biology, anthropology. Difference is where? Difference is the human focus, right? The same thing you might also argue with history and with psychology, with English, all these things. Now, I want to point out a couple things though, specifically with social culture anthropology. Now, you might ask yourself, what's the difference between that and you know, African studies or East Asian studies or Native American studies? They're very related. And in fact, a lot of them use each other's work, right? But the difference is, again, like we talked about in the beginning, it's the method in which they go about it. Even though Native American studies might do it, they have different standards for what research are, and it's not anthropology standards. It's just very different. Now, also on top of that, I would like to emphasize the journalism. Journalism is also very similar to social culture anthropology. So is history, right? But one thing I really want to point out, right, as an advantage of anthropology is I want to ask you, history people use literature to back up or to do research on things that happened in the past, right? Okay. Now let me ask you a question. Does the New York Times reflect anything you are going through day to day? Anything that you care about day to day? I would say, generally speaking, very little. Okay. Now, if I were a historian and I use the New York Times to gauge your lifestyle, would that be very accurate? Probably not. And that's the importance of anthropology right there, is that a lot of times there's a lot of things that we look at for information it's accurate, but is it accurately describing the people that you're trying to study? That's where anthropology, I think, shines. Okay. Um, Make sure to do your reflection. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. Other than that, have a good week. And yeah, just keep checking Brightspace. Make sure you're up to date on Brightspace.